The number one challenge is hiring, even more so when you're starting an agency versus later on, because if you're hiring someone that's talented, they're either going to be really expensive or they're going to want ownership in the agency. The only other people that are willing to join don't know what they're doing yet.
Hello and welcome to the Jumpstart podcast with Jeffalytics. I'm your host, Jeff Sauer. Today, for our 31st episode, we will talk with Jacob Baadsgaard, founder of Disruptive Advertising. Jake and I had talked previously about our respective businesses, so this is our second time chatting. But this time, the introduction came from Andrea Warner, who you may remember from our episode 30, aka our last guest. They've been working together recently, and they said, hey, we've got a lot of really cool things going on. And I said, well, let me talk to both of you. So it was really nice to hear Jake's story, and I personally walked away impressed. I recorded this episode in Arlington, Virginia, and when it goes live, I'll be back in Minnesota teaching classes at both the University of St. Thomas and DemandQuest. So I'm trying to get a few episodes lined up before this crazy few months ahead of teaching, speaking, and our newest course launching in January. If you pay close attention to this podcast, you're going to hear a little bit about that course as we go forward. But enough about that. Let's talk about Jake. So Jake is really what I'd call a textbook case of how you can find success in business, and even a great case study that I'd use on how to plan for the future. So let's just talk about a few little steps that he went through. First, he went to school for an in-demand degree, and then he went and worked at the hottest startup in technology in his local area as his first job. And so then he works with hundreds of enterprise clients, rounds out his experience by taking a stint on the client side, and then he went out on his own and started his own business, which we talk about in detail in our interview. And so what I would recommend is, I don't want to give away too much about his story, but it's really something you should pay attention to if you've ever thought about starting your own business or freelancing or anything. If you're like, one day I want to do that, then this is a really good one to listen to. So for me, it was a pleasure to talk to Jake, and I look forward to talking to him more now that we've formed a strong connection. I hope this conversation impresses you too. So let's talk to Jake. For show notes, visit jeffalytics.com/Jacob. So we're here today with Jacob Baadsgaard. Jacob, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I'm excited to hear your story, and I like to start everybody off by having them share that aha magic light bulb moment when they worked on a project or for a client, or they did something that made them say, digital marketing is the career for me. So can you describe the moment that you had that made you realize this is something you wanted to get involved with?
Yeah, it's interesting because if you had asked me at an earlier point in my life if marketing was the direction I would have wanted to go, it wasn't even on my radar. My degree was in information systems, which was more related to database management, programming, business management, those types of things. And I do find it interesting where I am today. And the moment that I realized this was, at the time in Utah, there was a hot company that was growing called Omniture, which was later bought by Adobe. Everyone wanted to work there. It was really exciting. It was very well aligned with my degree. They recruited from there. I went to Brigham Young University, and so that's where I went after college. Mm-hmm. And what I did was I just helped companies implement their web analytics. And so Zero Marketing just helped them set up the tracking so that the marketers that were our clients could use that information to make good decisions. So I was just involved on the data side. And over time, I just started to see trends, commonalities between all of the clients that I was helping do this, and the fact that most of them, even when they had the data, didn't know what to do with it. And so for me, I remember there was a couple of specific situations where, not being the marketer, I was just looking at the data, and I told one of my clients, hey, we've got all of this set up and we're tracking it correctly, but I noticed that you're bidding on these keywords that you're spending a lot of money on in Google AdWords, and they're creating leads for you, but none of those leads have turned into sales. So you might want to consider just turning those off and see what happens. Mm-hmm. And so the next week we get together, we have a weekly status call, and they say, hey, Jacob, we took your recommendation, we turned those off, and you're not going to believe this. It looks like it's going to save us about $3 to $4 million a year. Wow. in our AdWords budget. But here's the kicker. it was actually taking budget away from the leads that were producing higher quality sales opportunities. So we're actually seeing that this is going to create a substantial revenue impact for the business as well.
Unbelievable.
So that was my moment when I was on this phone call. I'm like, oh, apparently I'm a PPC expert now, right? And I thought, this is fun because my background was all in data. And this is when I found the application for that data to actually really help businesses succeed. And that was my moment when I realized, okay, I need to start kind of changing gears and using my background in data. But the application and how I really help businesses be successful is using that data in a meaningful way to get more out of their ad budgets online.
That's amazing. Actually, it's funny. I had a similar aha moment myself because I was always the programmer guy, like the technology guy. And analytics was sort of like the function of programming or the function of the webmaster type thing. So that's how I got into it. And I did the same thing. I looked at somebody's analytics account and I said, I think I can save you $600,000 just by turning off this one campaign because it's gotten you 0 sales and done no good for you. And that's exactly what happened. They saved hundreds of thousands, not millions. Like that's even more impressive. But in a very short amount of time, they're like, wow, we didn't even know that. And so it's both the aha moment for me of how impactful it is to trim budgets and also how impactful analytics is.
Absolutely. And that's, with good analytics, you can make great marketing decisions. And what I've found very interesting is having a good marketing background is still really valuable. And there's still a lot of things that I've had to learn from that point on to become a good marketer.
Yeah.
But when you have a good foundation in data, making decisions becomes a lot less subjective because you're just making sound decisions on actual data. So it was a great background and precursor to becoming a great marketer, which I would definitely recommend to anyone that is looking to get into the marketing field. Make sure you understand how to use analytics and make good data-driven decisions.
Yeah, so I'm curious about that. Like, in your role, were you expected to be delivering those types of insights, or is that sort of like frowned upon? Were you taking a risk by making that recommendation? Or was it just like, hey, I'm confident in these numbers, and I just see an opportunity, I need to bring it up?
Yeah, so in my organization, in this consulting department, there was about 250 consultants. They were split into several different roles, the primary difference being technical implementation, and the other was business insights and recommendations. And so basically you had your technical implementation consultants and then you had those that would help make recommendations on the data. So that wasn't in my role to do that. However, it was just one of those things that I saw the opportunity and took advantage of it. Wasn't necessarily frowned upon. It's actually what allowed me to move into more of a hybrid role where I would take my clients from end to end, implement the analytics, and then stay on and help them get value from that data as well.
Great. And so I'm guessing that being able to do that with several clients, it looks like you had 100 plus clients that you were working with. Was that something you were able to deliver for all of them, or did you focus more on more impactful insights for a smaller number, or how did that part work, dealing with all kinds of different companies and having that much exposure?
Yeah, so as I progressed into more senior roles in the organization, I actually just got down to working with 3 to 4 clients at a time.
Yeah, and is it easier to deliver insights with fewer clients, or do you find that working on a bunch at a time gives you more cross-training and more ability to see patterns?
So I certainly think having a breadth of knowledge and understanding a variety of different business models is beneficial. And so in my time as a consultant in industry, not running my own business, I probably did work with 100 or a little bit more than 100 enterprise businesses in that time period. And I certainly think that the collective experience from all of those helped develop the skill set that I had as it relates to at any one given time. Of course, that will depend on the nature of the engagement and the time commitment necessary to drive results. But, what I've seen in my career and my agency it tends to, based on scope, be anywhere between about 5 to 15 clients at a time that one can successfully be providing insight to and real meaningful contribution.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that doing one at a time can be difficult because unless you, it's great because you have the amount of focus, but also sometimes you don't get to see everything that's going on versus if you do 50 clients. I've met people who had 50 clients at a time, and I was like, well, how do you can't even get an hour a week to focus on them, and you need a certain amount of time. You need at least, a couple hours a week in order to deliver insights for somebody.
Correct.
Cool. Okay, so it looks like you stayed at Adobe for a while, and like great first job out of college prepared you for quite a few things and gave you exposure to like the enterprise level clients. What did you do after that?
Yeah, so that was obviously where I developed this skill set that I used to build my own agency with. And basically my moment I loved working at Adobe and at Omniture. I had a great experience and really credit a lot of my opportunity to them and for the experience that I had working there. But, I did eventually come up against this moment where I realized that there are a lot of ceilings imposed in corporate America. There are things that are going to control how fast you can grow within the organization. And I ran into a few of those areas where I thought, you know what, at the end of the day, I want to put myself in a situation where I eat what I kill, I guess we could call it, and have some more control over my growth as an individual and as a professional. And so that was when I realized it was time for me to go ahead and break off on my own and do my own thing. So there was kind of this brief stint in between, and sometimes this is overlooked when people look at my profile on LinkedIn or the success that we've had as an agency. And there was two things that kind of helped make all of that happen. So because I was concerned about some non-compete areas of my working agreement with Adobe,
Yep.
I actually took an interim role for a year with a previous client of mine as their director of digital marketing and primarily overseeing their PBC and SEO strategy. And during that time period, two things happened. Number one, the CMO in this organization and I had a great relationship, and he understood that it was my intention to start my own agency. He just said, hey, when you're ready to make that switch, we'll become your first client, right? Mm-hmm. So awesome. I really encourage people to be open with the people that they work with, because most of the time, as long as you deliver results, they're going to be okay with it.
Yep.
The second thing that happened is I actually had a brief e-commerce business that I ran, wholesaling Adobe software, which was their Photoshop, Master Collection, Illustrator, etc., and was selling that software. Made some good connections with my experience in the industry, and had a really good 6-month period where was able to produce a good amount of profit from that business. Unfortunately, Adobe moved everything to the cloud, which cut a lot of the middlemen out of the mix, which was a bummer for me. But what that did is it actually gave me the financial resources to feel confident branching out on my own, and to also seed the company some money to get started. I actually loaned the company $100,000 when I first started Disruptive Advertising. Mm-hmm. And because I was in a good place personally with finances, it was okay if the company didn't make money for a little while, right? Yeah. And the good thing is I was able to pay that loan back within the first, that would have been the first 5 months of starting the business, and was able to focus on maintaining profitability. But I look at that, Jeff, and I really think that accelerated the growth of my agency. Probably, I estimate about 3 to 4 years. Yeah. Without having some of that capital of my own to get started with. And so definitely that's kind of the intermediate steps that occurred before I actually started Disruptive Advertising.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I want to get into Disruptive Advertising for sure, but I also wanted to sort of understand a little bit about being on the client side and talk about that a little bit, that experience and how that helped you out as well. And so the first question I have about it is, what was it like going from being a consultant working on many things to being on the client side and working on just one client and one opportunity? It sounds like you were able to generate some great success for them. Did you find that being concentrated like that was really helpful, or did you run out of things to do? How do you describe that experience?
It was a great experience. I've never had a job I didn't love. And that particular opportunity was a fantastic experience. The honest answer is there's only so many times you can change your marketing strategy, because you have to let enough data come in before you can make meaningful decisions. Mm-hmm. And so although we were managing over $250,000 a month in AdWords budget, in addition to our other digital channels, our SEO budget, etc., what I did find is that because I knew what I was doing, I could get everything done that I needed to, and it didn't take me that long every day. And so it actually created a great opportunity for me. This is, I was doing on the side that wholesaling business, and, getting started with the agency as well. And so I loved it. It allowed me to provide great value, but at the end of the day, focusing on just one account, I realized that there's only so much you can do, and it didn't take 8 to 10 hours a day to stay on top of it and get great progress.
Yeah, that's cool, and I think that it seems like a good interim move, and I've talked to a lot of entrepreneurs who started their own place, and there's two decisions you make, right? One is, you want to start an agency, but are you ready yet? Are you ready to do it all there? Do you have a key client that you can work on? Do you have the revenue? Those types of things. And I think the ones who wait a little bit and who are more methodical about it end up having the most success, and that's because they had time to really think about it. They had time to really think about what they're going to do when they get to this point. They had time to save their money, so they didn't have to be accountable for revenue within month one, or they had some kind of net that they could use in order to support the company as they went forward, and then they could hit the ground running. And I like what you were saying about how this interim step, taking a year maybe to wait out your non-compete or whatever you want to call it, or just to try a new experience, then going into your agency, you said that it accelerated what you were doing by 3 or 4 years, which is a pretty remarkable amount of time when you think about it. Because I would agree with that statement, that if you don't, if your first $100,000 is not something you need to be penny pinching on, then you can make investments towards where you want to go. So that's really, I think, a good lesson for us all to learn, is that just because you want to do something doesn't mean you should jump into it. It means you should save your money and be prepared to have some time where it's not going to do exactly what you want. And in that way, you don't have to be as cautious with the way that you run your business.
Well, and I think that you're absolutely right. And there's a few things that certainly motivated me in that regard. Number one is I had a family, right? I was married, I had a couple of kids, and so taking that type of risk is something that would have been really hard for my wife to be on board with. But by getting myself to the point where we were in a good personal financial situation, we had some cash to work with to get the business started, it helped her feel a lot more comfortable. And by having the support of my spouse, it was certainly something that helped me as the business owner, having her completely bought in a way that worked for her as well. And, the other thing is, I would probably liken it to saying I was still incredibly hungry to make it work, but I didn't feel like I was starving every month. And so I felt like I was actually making better decisions because of that.
Yes.
Rather than decisions out of desperation. And I think that was probably the key, and one of the things that I really appreciated. I could have marketing dollars right from the get-go. I could hire someone before I had the contracts to justify that person, to make sure that I could get things built out. Again, those are a couple of the things that were beneficial for me. Everyone's going to do it in their own way, but that's certainly my experience.
Yeah. Did education help? Did you take any business classes? Was there a mentor who helped you do that stuff? Did you talk to people? How did you know these things, or was it just intuitive for you?
Well, intuitively, I did a lot of things wrong and right. And one of the things that I love is learning from others so that I don't have to make the same mistakes that they did.
Yes.
And so one of the first things I did was I actually got involved in a networking group with business owners so that I could have people to reach out to and talk to. And actually, some of my first clients have proven to be my best mentors. Mm-hmm. And allowing them to understand my business and what I'm trying to accomplish and getting their feedback. My first client raised over $26 million to fund the growth with all of the leads that I was able to drive into their organization. Wow. The second client that I worked with was able to successfully exit from their business in a pretty large deal, again, given the results that we were able to drive from the digital marketing standpoint. So what was fun is they were going through a lot of business experiences, and I was able to kind of be there with them for that and see the decisions that they were making and how they were doing that. And it was incredibly helpful. But there are a few things from school that have been incredibly helpful for me, because information systems, at least the degree as I took it, half my junior year was focused on tech. So this is programming, database, all of those things, and was very helpful for me to have a good technical understanding of how to do things. The second year was all business management. It was in the Marriott School of Management at BYU. And so learning accounting, learning having some marketing classes, some general business management classes, those types of things actually were incredibly helpful for me because I was able to understand a P&L right out of the gate. I was able to make some good decisions, but actually probably one of the things that helped the most is it was actually a brother-in-law who is kind of an independent outsourced CFO kind of guy. Mm-hmm. And I just paid him $2,500 a month. This was about 6 months into my starting the business.
Yep.
And I couldn't afford a controller, nor did I need one. I didn't need a CFO or anything like that. But I did need someone to help me make good financial decisions.
Yep. And
so he helped me determine what my business KPIs were, put together a KPI report for me once a week. We sat down, we talked about it, we made good, sound financial decisions. And by doing that, of the 36 months that we've officially existed as a business, we've been profitable 35 of those.
That's great.
And so just being very disciplined with those things. I have the tendency to run the business by emotion. And so having a resource like that I didn't have to give up a ton of ownership to, it was a lot of, $2,500 a month is a lot for an entrepreneur to be paying someone, but that's a lot less expensive than giving up 25% of your business or, a lot of the other alternatives that you've got. And I feel like that actually is probably one of the areas that's been the most beneficial and helpful for me in growing the organization, knowing when to hire, what types of clients we actually want to be working with, structuring compensation models, all of those things he's helped with, and that's been really helpful for me.
No, I think that's a great takeaway, and that is, it seems weird early in a business to have like a really strong financial mind because there's maybe not that much money in there, or there's not as much going for you as you think. So it's like, do I want to make that investment? But obviously, you putting some money in there in being able to pay for it out of that money, or it sounds like you were even profitable, or you paid yourself back before you brought this person on.
Yes.
It allows you to make an investment that maybe you wait until 10 people or 20 people. But the thing is, you might never get to 10 to 20 people if you don't spend right or if you don't do things the right way. And so that's really cool that you have that person involved. The agency that I'm still part owner in has the same thing. It was founded by a CPA, so I get a really good perspective of how the business piece works and how you should look at things. And they provide a financial perspective that I don't think a lot of agencies have or know intuitively. And so I think that the earlier you can get that involved, the more you can make sure that you're cash flowing, that you have process in place for financials, that you're making good decisions with your budget, and that you're actually making money. Because I think a lot of agencies don't really make money because they don't understand that piece, or they say, "Oh, I'm the creative person. I don't want to be the money person." Yeah. And so there's two ways to handle it. One is you bring somebody in as your partner and give them a part of your company to handle that piece because you don't want to, or you find somebody who is good at it, like you did with, for example, with your brother-in-law, and they can give you just amazing perspective. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you need somebody full-time, like you said. It could just be an advisor. But the cool thing is that it's like a yin and a yang, right? Like a good financial person can't really shine without a business, without a business to talk about. And so you need to create the business in order to draw somebody good in there. So it's sort of cool to think about it from that perspective. Like on the open market, they might not be able to command a ton of money unless they're part of a big business. And so knowing that, you can sometimes get a really valuable person, like an invaluable person to your company, but they won't charge you that much because they need your business to be more valuable. And that might be a little bit long-winded, but it's sort of a cool symbiotic relationship that develops.
I agree.
Yeah, so I'm interested in. I think it's really cool that you did that because, like I said, I've talked to a lot of agencies. I'm developing a course talking about agencies and how to do these things, and a lot of the fundamentals are things that you talked about. So it's really cool that you've been able to do that and to learn all these things and to grow it. And so, congrats on that. I think that does tie back into when you ease into the business a little bit more, you put yourself in a situation where you can afford to do that, right? Rather than putting it all on the line, getting into debt, not having any revenue. I think easing into it does allow you to create that opportunity for yourself.
and not compromise the long-term benefit that you can get from the business as well.
Yep, exactly. I think you don't want to overplan things. You don't want to be only planning, and then if something goes wrong, you're devastated. But you need to have some kind of idea as to what the outcome's going to look like. What does it look like? What does it feel like when we're successful? Because then you can start to plan for that.
Yep, 100%.
Great. Okay, so one thing I was, so I like hearing this origin story. It's really fascinating. So it took you 5 months to pay yourself back. Did you have an anchor client when you went on your own? Did you have a few clients lined up, or was there, like you said, 35 out of 36 months profitable? Does that mean that month 1 was the only one that it wasn't, or how does that part work?
It was actually month 14 that was not profitable for us. And I will always remember that month because we tried to change our model too much and it kind of blew up in my face. But to answer your first question is absolutely I had an anchor client. That first one that I mentioned to you that raised several large rounds of funding.
Yep.
I was working with them. It was the company that I worked at in college. And that's how I had that relationship there. Mm-hmm. I said, hey, I know how you do all this analytics and digital marketing stuff now. I could probably help you guys be successful. We ran that program for a little while. They were my first client. I actually started doing work with them on the side in 2009. So that was 4 years before I started my agency.
Wow.
And because they were small enough and what they had going on, there was no competing interest. I approved it with my manager to make sure he was okay with me doing that work on the side. And they were okay with that. Again, I'm just a big believer in just being open with people, and you can usually find a win-win for everybody. And that was my first client. They paid me $800 a month for probably the first 3 years that I worked with them. When I started the agency, at this point, they'd gone from spending $20,000 a month in AdWords to $300,000 a month in AdWords.
Wow.
And so they were growing very quickly. And I said, you know what? Why don't we come up with some fun performance-based model? So it was related to reduction in cost per lead, increase in lead volume, improvement in the return on ad spend. And we came up with a pretty complex model, but that if we hit those numbers, not only would it make them a lot of money, rather than just charging a flat rate, which is what I was doing at the time, we would get a percentage of the value that we drove for them. And so between that, and then you'll remember that the job that I had in between actually came on as a client of mine as well.
Okay, yep.
So those were my two anchor clients. If either of those two canceled in the first year, I would have been in a much more difficult situation. And those two literally probably funded the business for the first year, which is what allowed me to be profitable from day one.
Yep.
Between those two, it was close to $50,000 a month in revenue. Obviously, we were driving great results for them in order to be able to charge that. I had to go and have a pretty heated argument with the CEO when I totally nailed it on some of the metrics. And when they saw what they were going to have to pay me, they didn't want to.
Yeah.
And so I had to get in there and really fight for that. So there was this bittersweet moment where this first client that I worked with, between them and the job that I had prior, switching over to working with me, that was accounting for anywhere between $30,000 to $50,000 a month because it was fairly performance-based. And that was enough to, between the other clients we were accumulating along the way, allowed me to hire a couple of people, stay profitable, and have it be a good thing. Now, what was interesting about that is that first client that I mentioned to you, been able to experience that entire life cycle of a business from startup to seeing them grow, get over 300 employees, see them get bought out by venture capitalists, things kind of start going in the wrong direction, and now they're struggling. And they actually did cancel with us earlier this year, in fact. And so it was interesting to see by the time, because I don't work with either of those clients now, everyone that I worked with there left the organization, and that's when we do tend to lose clients, is when the CMO or our relationship in that organization leaves and a new person comes in. It's about 50-50 proposition at that point, whether or not we're going to be able to keep that engagement. So it was interesting to see if they canceled at the wrong time, that could have devastated the business. Because we focused and made sure we were driving them excellent value when the time came that we did stop working with them, while it was still a bummer, we were totally positioned that it didn't really have much of a negative impact on the business at all.
That's awesome. I mean, that's really what you want, is to start the business off of an anchor client, but then as quickly as you can move on to diversified revenue streams. Because I love what you're saying about if they have a new CMO, you have maybe a 50-50. It's like rolling the dice on whether they'll want you or not. And it has nothing to do with your own performance.
Correct. It's basically you're starting the sales process over again when you have a new when there's a new person there.
Yep. That's funny. I actually had that in the agency course. I'm going to do a section on that, and I might have to have you back on again to talk about it, because it's just great advice that nobody really thinks about, is like, no matter how good you are in this world, there's external forces that are beyond your control. If a CMO has somebody who is really good they worked with at their last job, then it doesn't matter how good you are. You either need to win them over or they're going to choose that person just because that's their guy or that girl or that agency that they work with.
And it brings up one other point, Jeff, which is really interesting, and that is, as you can imagine, those clients expected me to be fairly involved for the lifetime of their engagement with us. And even though I started more and more kind of delegating and having other people fulfill, it was something that was actually a fairly big time drain on me to keep them happy and keep them working with us long term.
Yep.
And so it was actually a bittersweet moment, because there's feelings of appreciation and gratitude for the opportunity that they gave me. But it was also an excellent time. And as a company, we've hit even greater growth curve, because now I've been able to not spend as much of my time doing that client work anymore and focus on building the business. And so that was something that, again, it was a bittersweet moment. But you've probably done something right when the first couple of clients you worked with are no longer with you, and now you've got a team that's working with new clients that, I still like to know who our clients are, but the honest answer is we work with over 350 businesses now, and I don't know who all of them are, and I don't have a relationship with all of them, and I can't have a relationship with all of them. And that there's something actually really satisfying about that as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the key to scaling this person-based business, this agency business, is to be able to focus on the business, not in the business. And so I think as quickly as you can make that transition, the better off, the healthier the business becomes.
Yeah, and that took me, if we look from me doing work on the side through officially starting the agency, and I mean, I worked with that first client for, that would have been 7 years. So that was, that's interesting. I actually haven't really thought about it that way in a while.
Yeah, I mean, that's a long relationship, right? Just think about all your growth during that time, as well as the number of people who come in and out of the client. It's a crazy to think about how long these relationships can last if you do it right. But I do agree that it can be good if it goes away, or if it sort of moves on, because then you can start the new relationships that you have with all the smarter knowledge. So you don't have as much of the history, you don't have as much of the baggage, or the technical debt is the term that they use in our profession, or our college training is technical debt. And so it's sort of cool to see that you can survive without it. And it's a good litmus test, a good benchmark for a business.
Well, and what's one of the funny things, Jeff, is this is making me reminisce, but that first client that I worked with, where we had a major breakthrough that allowed them to go literally from 20, 25 employees to over 300 and just grow like crazy, was all because their analytics were set up correctly. I totally botched something and made a huge mistake in AdWords that blew a ton of money. But because the analytics were working, basically I imported a bunch of broad match keywords on accident. Mm-hmm. And a nugget in all of that, wasted money, it was a big mistake on my part. We found a couple of keywords that totally nailed it for them, that no one else was doing in the industry, really figured something out. And so it's kind of interesting thinking back that the first big breakthrough for that first client of mine came about by a mistake on my end. But because we had the analytics set up correctly, we were able to still get enough value from it and then turn that mistake into a big win for them.
I love hearing that. I similar stories of screwing up, and I think that my screwing up is actually the best thing you can do, because when you break something, you learn how to put it together, and many times we never learned how to put it together in the first place.
Right.
So if
And
you're
it
working on
burns it
something,
into your memory forever.
exactly, yep, having to put it, and I think I did the same thing where I spent 3/4 of the budget in day one of a 30-day month. And the creative way to spend the last quarter of the budget, you get some ideas that you never had before. But if you do it right, you can actually figure out how to make the whole account more efficient. If you can do 100% of the results on a quarter of the budget after your screw up, then that means that you basically could now, every time moving forward, you could save them 3/4 of the expense and still get the same results. And so I love what you're saying there.
Makes you be scrappy and just figure things out in a way that sometimes you don't.
Yeah.
I agree.
So I know we talked briefly about the performance marketing angle and how that started, and then how once people see how great you do, they're like, well, I wonder if we want to pay this out. Do you still use that model, the business model of performance, or do you have what type of model have you adopted since then?
My experience is that it depends on what type of agency you are trying to grow. If this is a lifestyle and you're going to personally stay involved with these relationships and with these clients and with the work being done, then I think it can work really well, because it worked really well for me when I was involved and the one doing it. Can you scale a business around performance models? And if we had, of the 350 businesses we currently work with, if we had a custom performance model for all 350, I'm going to have a much larger accounting department than I currently have.
Accounting alone would be several full-time jobs.
So my recommendation is that if you're working with a small handful of clients and this is a lifestyle agency, then I think that is something that can be done and done well. If you're actually trying to grow a larger agency, I've chosen not to do that. Now, we do have some custom pricing that we set up for our clients, but nothing that's nearly as customer performance-based as it was before. We tend to just bill a minimum amount or a percentage of ad spend for a certain range of our clients. And anything on the enterprise side, we're typically just working out a flat custom rate that works for them and for us. And so we've found that that's a lot easier for both parties. We revisit on a semi-regular basis, but we've decided to simplify and to not go that direction as much.
Yeah. No, I think that's the model that any CFO would recommend as well. It might not have as much of an upside, but a business isn't run by the potential for upside. A business is run for the money you can put in the bank, and for the budgeting, and for the people you can hire, and for paying out bonuses and profitability. Nothing in a business statement is based on potential upside. It's based on what you can collect. And so I think that, it sounds good. And I was fortunate that a lot of people would approach me when I first started in SEO saying, can I do a performance-based model? And I'd be like, hey, we'll look into that. Well, quickly, the founder of the company, the agency that I have a part in, was like, no, we would never do that. That's not a good idea, because they'll never pay you if things go as well as you think. And we don't have enough money to budget, so we could never hire an employee if we didn't know we were going to get at least their salary back each month. And so basically you have downside where you can't even pay your employees if it doesn't work, and the upside is something that they'll probably push back on if it does get to that point, at least over time, because that's just not how the finance business works. They work in a completely different way. And as we had established earlier, it's sort of counterintuitive for a marketer how the financial areas work, but it's what needs to happen. The other way wouldn't work, and there'd be a lot more companies going out of business.
Yep.
That's fascinating. So it's cool to see you arrive at these points. Like I said, these are things that you might take a 15, 20-year career to get to this point. So it's good to see that you not only have been able to thrive, but you've been able to sort of turn this business into one that's scaling well, and one that's bringing in all kinds of cool clients and everything. So the next thing I wanted to ask you about is that piece. Like, okay, so as a founder, you're working on other clients, you have a certain business model in place, and then eventually you realize, I need to hire people to scale. I need to put them in a place to succeed. I need to concentrate on growing our revenue. I need to concentrate on the business. What are some examples of things you did to help grow the business from that perspective, aside from just doing great work for clients?
Well, And this is where it's been really satisfying for me is I try to do for myself what we do for our clients. And so it comes down to a couple of basic principles that have allowed us to be successful there. Number one is determining as best as possible, because there are always some estimations, customer lifetime value, right? How much do our clients pay us on average? Of course, we've got our outliers. On average, how much do our clients pay us? How long do they tend to work with us? And, in that situation, understanding that information then empowers you to make the next set of decisions that helps you be successful as a business. How much can I afford to pay to get a new client?
Yep.
Right? Which we refer to as CAC, or customer acquisition cost. So those are the first two things that if you can kind of build out a working model there, then it just kind of allows you to know what you can or can't do to be successful. And so those are the first two things that I've been able to spend some good time doing. And to be honest, I've been a little disappointed with, we tend to, our larger clients, we tend to keep around about as long as we would expect. Our smaller clients tend to come and go quicker than we would like them to. So those numbers have adjusted over time, and
Yep.
we just have to keep those things in mind. But those are the first two things that I'm looking at. Then we start to look at which of the clients do we actually like working with, and which ones do we want more of based on what they pay us and based on whether or not we like working with them and the types of results that we can drive for them. And so that comes down to building a well-defined buyer persona. Giving them a name, giving them an age, gender, likes, dislikes, interests, pain points that they experience, and why they might want to work with you. And then we put together, then I've put together a marketing roadmap of how am I going to get in front of those people. And, I've spent close to $1 million of my own on AdWords now.
Yep.
Targeting them and driving in traffic and business that way. We've sponsored and attended a lot of conferences. We've done a lot of content writing and invested a lot of money there, right? Not everything's worked out the way that we would like it to, but because we understand what we can afford to pay for a customer, it allows me to go in and strategically test new lead sources. Can we get this, can we get the sales that we need from it? Is it in alignment with our customer acquisition cost targets? And we've been able to figure a few of those out. And by doing that, we've actually chosen, while we do have partners that we work with, we do very, very little white label, and we do get some partner referrals, but the clients are just working directly with us, and there's usually some sort of kickback for the partner.
Yep.
But we are, for the most part, we're driving about 90% of our own sales through our own marketing efforts. And what I like about that is it kind of leaves me in the driver's seat rather than being subject to a partner or an avenue that could completely change my business model overnight if someone has a change of heart in how they want to work with us.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that is definitely, like, partnerships can be good, but also you don't have the same level of control, or control is a good way to put it, or just consistency. I mean, it can really throw you for a loop. That's cool. So I think that basically the way that I'm hearing it is freeing yourself from working in the business again lets you decide to work on the business. So you can now, with margins and with a good team in place, you can focus your own time, and you can even hire people to do the marketing function. I think that's also where most agencies do a poor job. They do the shoemaker's children thing, where their website is out of date, or they don't do AdWords for themselves. They can't really separate it because it's hard to make that switch between client work and then on your own business, because if you're only working on clients, that's where you're going to put all of your time. Like, you can't get away from it because clients are demanding. Clients want what you're doing. So you need to free yourself up to do that. And the only way you can really free yourself up is, one, to make an investment like you did for yourself at one point, is invest money in it and then use that money to hire somebody to grow. So invest in growth, or just have good enough margins on what you're doing and make enough money versus your headcount that you can just put that into your budget and say, we're going to use this to grow our business.
Yep. And then the other thing that I've found is getting sales is actually proven to be one of the easier aspects for us as a business. And I know it's different for every agency.
Yeah.
The biggest challenge that we're now facing is how do we attract and develop enough talent to be able to do the work for all of those accounts that we're selling. And so that's been legitimately a challenge for us. Utah is now considered Silicon Slopes.
Yep.
There is a lot of VC money here. There are a lot of startups. We have one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country. And just finding good, talented people has proven to be a challenge. And so one other key area where I've had to focus a lot of my time is creating a culture and a performance-driven compensation plan that allows people to be in control of have a lot of control over their own income, their success here at Disruptive. And that's played a big part of that, because now most of the people that we're hiring, we're not getting them from LinkedIn job postings, from all those places where you can go and put your listings. We do occasionally get a good candidate from there, but the majority of them are just employer referrals at this point.
Yep.
And so that's something that's helped out quite a bit. And the more we focus on making sure that it's a win-win-win, a win for the business, a win for the client, and a win for the employee, that's when everything's clicking pretty well, and actually a lot of things start to take care of themselves. But focusing on our employees, we've found that is what best takes care of our clients and the business. And so developing them, helping them earn a competitive or above average wage for the services that they provide, and helping them feel appreciated and that they're good at what they do, that they have the tools to be successful. And so those are kind of the areas where I've had to focus most of my time, Jeff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good way to put it as well, and that is, you can't scale people very well unless you invest in them.
Yep.
And it's still hard to scale people, especially in a competitive job market. I was in Utah to see the SLC SEM group earlier this year, and I couldn't believe like the growth, like the place that I was, where the new Adobe campus is. Apparently there was nothing there before, and now it's just like nonstop construction, and there's a hotels sprouting up everywhere. So I can see where there's a demand. There's a lot of companies taking the demand, and so you need to be competitive there, and you need to not just rely on the talent to come to you. You need to develop the talent. You need to find people who have skill sets and develop them. That's how I actually got into teaching myself, because the same was true in the Minneapolis market, as there wasn't enough talent to fill all the jobs, and I think that's still at that point. And so I started teaching to get more people certified and to get more people into that area. Does your company do that? Do you have an internal training program? What do you look for in somebody who may not have Google AdWords on their resume in order to turn them on to paid social or paid search?
So I definitely don't have the answer to that yet, because that's something that I'm trying to figure out myself. But I can tell you what we're currently trying. And that is, we've got two great universities here that actually do have marketing and digital marketing programs. And so what we've started to do, and in fact, we're just hiring our first round of interns right now, seniors in college that exhibit the three traits that we look for at Disruptive is hungry, humble, and good people skills. And so if they've got those three skills and they have a degree that's relevant for us, we're bringing them in as internships in their senior year. And if things go well, then we're extending full-time offers. Because for me, finding people with AdWords experience the way that we need it does happen, but there's not very many of them. Mm-hmm. They can often be more expensive than we can afford. And so this is an avenue that we're trying right now. I'm curious to see how that goes.
Yeah. I think also if they have the experience, sometimes you need to untrain them, because bad habits can come across and they might not look at it the same way as you do. I've seen a lot of people who don't know how to think about AdWords. They think they trust Google a little bit too much.
100%. 100%. And that's one of the biggest challenges we have as an agency. And now that the shoe is on the other foot for me, I've invested a lot of my own money in figuring these things out. I understand the client's perspective a little bit better, and how easy it is as an agency or even as an employee to not feel the pain the way that the business feels the pain when that budget doesn't produce an ROI, right? Yeah. And that's something that is a challenge, to make sure that everyone recognizes that and that shares that same sense of urgency for their client.
Absolutely. I love that sense of urgency piece too, because that's really what clients want, is they want somebody to care about their business or feel it like they do when something doesn't go well. Everybody's fine when everything's going up and to the right, when everything's good. It's when things aren't good that really separate different types of service providers from, the good ones from the bad ones.
Absolutely.
Cool. So it's great hearing about your business and how it's taking off and some of the moves you made. Really fascinating. I think it's like a great case study in things people should be doing and things that you can do well. It's find business, separate yourself from the day-to-day as much as you can, and then grow that business in a strategic way that's sustainable, that makes everybody win, both your clients and your employees. And then obviously if you can do both of those things, the business owner wins quite a bit in the end as well.
Yep.
So I'd like to move on to our rapid fire question section and just ask a few questions, and then we'll be
let's
done.
do it.
So what's the biggest difference between managing search on the client side and the agency side?
The biggest difference, in my opinion, would be lack of perspective. So on the client side, you it can become, at least from my experience, pretty easy to develop tunnel vision. Where on the agency side, I feel like because you do have enough diversity in accounts that you're working on, it provides some perspective that you don't have otherwise.
Great. What's broken with the agency-client relationship?
The sense of urgency from the agency representatives that are working with the client.
How do you differentiate yourself from other agencies out there?
Two things. Making sure that analytics are set up correctly, and then also we do conversion rate optimization or site experience testing to make sure the traffic that we are driving is converting and generating a return.
Great. Do you build that into the services you offer? Is it built into your package, or is that included in your management fee?
It depends on the size of the client. Sometimes it's just built in. If it's pretty straightforward, if it's complex, it's a different scope.
Yep, for sure. I found that was an interesting thing, is that obviously you stick with your client a lot longer if you make them convert better, because the results are going to be better. But also
Yep.
So you want to put yourself in a position to deliver good work for them. But sometimes it's like, this should be a separate project. So does it come in the scope of our PPC or elsewhere? And I think distinguishing, well, how much work is it going to be is the big piece.
Well, and again, that's still the biggest differentiator. Is I've seen so many businesses and agencies raise their hands in celebration because they just improved the conversion rate. They had a 50% lift, but then the lead quality sucks and it didn't actually impact the return that they're getting from anything. You can offer a free iPad on a site testing experience engagement that you're doing. And so, again, I think it all comes back to analytics, and that's where we try to differentiate ourselves. You've got a lot of background there as well. Sometimes wins are not wins, and sometimes losses are not losses. Sometimes an increase in cost per lead could be a really good thing if the cost per sale goes down.
Absolutely. What's the hardest part about running an agency?
I would say the hardest part about running an agency is either clients or employees that don't do what they say they're going to do.
I agree with that. And then I had a follow-up on that is, have you found a solution to dealing with the problem?
Aligning motivations, it tends to resolve that quite a bit. And so rather than just expecting, I feel like the employer needs to work just as hard for the employee as the employee needs to work for the employer, and vice versa. The client needs to work just as hard as the agency to make things work. And rather than just assuming that people will do that, we do need to align incentives, align visions there. And so one of the things that I've done is aligned compensation based on account performance, which should, help resolve a lot of those issues between us and our clients.
Yeah. What are some tips for generating business, like new leads as an agency? I know you talked about a few in the interview portion, but any like business development tips for other people?
Yeah, I think the tip would be, don't be a one-trick pony, because even if it works in one area, things can dry up, things can change. And so I really recommend, when it comes to generating leads, make sure that you're doing some good old-fashioned biz dev and networking in your local markets, that you do what you claim to be good at, whether that be SEO or paid search, retargeting, social ads, social. I would just say approach it and have a holistic mindset, because otherwise you may be setting yourself up for failure if you become a one-trick pony. And so it's okay to start there, but I would definitely encourage you to make sure that you're diversifying your lead sources.
Great. So going back to the beginning when you were first starting the agency, what was the number one challenge for you?
The number one challenge is hiring, even more so when you're starting an agency versus later on, because if you're hiring someone that's talented, they're either going to be really expensive or they're going to want ownership in the agency. The only other people that are willing to join don't know what they're doing yet. And so my recommendation in that situation is be patient, hire the people that have the potential, and just be patient, hold their hand, and get them to a good spot, even if that takes you a little bit longer. I've had to buy out 2 partners because I made that mistake.
That's interesting. On partnerships, I'm curious about that. What should you look for in taking on a partner for your agency or for your business?
I would say the first thing is don't get a partner just because you lack confidence. And that's probably where I struggled initially, was I just lacked the confidence, but I had all the competence that I needed to make it happen. And so number one is I'd say just believe in yourself and be patient and be willing to work hard, even if it takes a little bit of time. Because there are situations where partnerships work out, but I've seen a lot more situations where things don't work out than they do. And so for me, I'm more of a solopreneur at this point. I have people that are, have the ability to earn options or stock in the company and those things based on performance. But, make sure that they're bringing as much to the table as you are, whether that be clients being brought to the table or the equivalent cash amount. Don't just bring on a partner because you feel like you need them. Make sure that they're buying their way in, whether that be through clients, cash. Just their experience is not enough, in my opinion, especially if you already have something going.
Yeah, you can't take reputation to the bank. It's really how do they make this company more valuable. And so taking on somebody means that it needs to be twice as valuable as you could on your own. And actually, it probably needs to be 3 times more valuable because of the pain that goes into that extra relationship, that extra connection, that bond. And it's basically like getting married to somebody, really, when you think about it, is that you are marrying this person and you're marrying your financial future to them, maybe even more than a real marriage in some cases.
It is. And, my recommendation in a lot of these situations is just find some good mentors first before you try and bring on a partner.
Yep.
And, take it, see how far you can take it on your own, get some good mentors, preferably someone with a good financial background, which is what was really helpful for me. Other business owners, whatever that is. That way you have a way to talk to someone that can relate with you, that can understand and give you some relevant experiences that they can share with you. But I wouldn't just get a partner just to get a partner. And in fact, I would a lot of the times encourage people to avoid that unless it's necessary.
Yeah. What is the future of paid search and paid social?
Paid search and paid social is going downhill unless you are optimizing your site experience to convert that traffic. Especially on paid search, traffic is too expensive for a non-optimized site. If you do that, you can absolutely develop a strategic advantage in your industry and you can blow up businesses. But if you don't place equal emphasis on where you're getting the traffic and the experience that you're pointing that to, you will not succeed.
Great. What advice do you have for a new marketer just getting into this industry?
What I would encourage anyone to do is to just develop a good marketing foundation in how to determine customer lifetime value, acceptable customer acquisitions costs, how to develop a good buyer persona, and then putting a marketing roadmap of how am I going to target this persona. You do those elements, and then all of a sudden you're just filling in the pieces now, because now running a paid search campaign is easy, or Facebook is. It's the strategy element that differentiates good marketers and bad marketers. So if you think you're a good marketer because you know how to bid on a keyword in AdWords, you're wrong. Learn how to understand what makes the business money, understand the buyer personas incredibly well, and then put together a strategy roadmap. And then you're just filling in the pieces, because setting up a campaign in anything is actually the easiest part. It's knowing what needs to be in that campaign is going to be the difficult aspect. So learn strategy, make sure that that's where you're developing your expertise. Otherwise, you may be shooting yourself in the foot and not progressing the way that you would like to.
I couldn't agree more with that. It's funny how many people think that paid search is the answer. The reality is that any smart business says, I need to find more customers, and then they do research and they say, well, our strategy is to do this, or our market position is that. Paid search is the way to find people that fit that profile. So it's not the ends, it's something in between. You need to figure out who your customer is, and then paid search is a way to reach them.
Yep.
And actually, most businesses, what they think is that, okay, well, if paid search is how do we reach them, do I need to become an expert in that? Or do I find somebody who's tinkering with levers all day and somebody who's doing that and have them do it for me? Because even though it's important, I don't want to waste time doing it. And so I think that's the thing we don't always realize in the agency-client relationship, is the clients bring on the paid search person to fulfill their strategy, not always to be the strategic partner. Now, I think that's where the best agencies shine, though, is that they say, okay, well, you want to do this. We think that it's going to be that. Let's make this even better. So you do the 1 + 1 = 3 type equation. That's where the best relationship comes in.
Absolutely.
Cool. And then just one last question, or one more that I added in there based on what you were saying is, I think this is a really fascinating topic, because I've thought about even my own businesses. I'm on my own as well. I thought that a partner was the solution to all the issues that I was facing at certain points in time. And then I realized that that's not the solution. The solution is to be focused and figure out what your business is. And then if a partner makes you twice as good as a business, then that's good. But you also don't need to give up your company or equity in your company in order to do that. It all comes from the person to say, how do we make this work? And so that's the biggest piece here, is figure out how to make this thing work, figure out a business model. And you said mentors. I think I really like that piece. You can read books. You can find mentors. You don't need to give somebody half of your company or a quarter of your company just to tell you what looks good on a financial statement. That doesn't necessarily need to be what gets partnered. It has to be somebody who's willing to work equally as hard as you in order to grow something. And like I said, to make it twice or 3 times as good as it would be if you did it on your own.
Yep.
Interesting. That's cool. I really appreciate your thoughts on that. I know that partnerships are always an interesting and sensitive topic, but I figured as a general point, it's good for us all to discuss that.
Agreed.
Cool. Well, that's all that I have for you today, Jacob. So thanks so much for joining us on the podcast.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Wow, Jake was so candid about each step he went through on building his business, and I really appreciate that. It's not always easy to talk about the steps along the way, especially when partners, clients, employees, and others who might have egos might get bruised. And so I'm glad he went through the depth that he did to talk about it, because that can be tough and a really sensitive subject. But you can tell his attitude's always looking forward, and I'd say that onward and upward mentality is the only way you can really survive in this crazy industry. So one of the best lessons that I took away from Jake in his interview was that he surrounded himself with smart advisors early in the process, and he used their advice to develop a really strong and long-lasting business model. I said it a few times in the interview, and I'll say it more here. It usually takes 10 to 20 years of experience to gain that level of wisdom, and Jake hasn't even been at this for a full decade. So kudos to him for being able to do that. And then again, for any of those of you who are looking at this as a path, this is somebody you can use as an example who figured it out early and has seen the benefits from it. So I personally wish Jake all the best in the future. I know that things aren't always going to be perfect, because running an agency is a lot of hard work, but it seems like he's really well equipped to handle both the ups and the downs for a long time to come. So for show notes, visit Jeffalytics.com/Jacob, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Go Jake, your growth with him is just a piece of cake. Your business to the moon and back he'll take, and loads of money you will make. Go Jake, marketing mix he'll shake and bake. Your broken sails he cannot break. He sees a rope where you see snakes. Call Jake, and no more leads will ever turn out fake. PPC will cause you no more headache. Sit back, enjoy your favorite steak. You won't be screwed like Rihanna by Drake.